Warren Causey. Warren is a certified arborist and he heads up a disaster group, Sirens Project. And so he's going to be joining us talking about some wedge lifts. And then also, I may even have Robert Albritton dropping by tonight. But anyway, we've got some interesting thoughts and processes to kind of go through. If you have any questions or anything, I do have chat lines opened up. But as we go through the evening here, we've got quite a lot to talk about. We've got a couple of workshops coming up. I've got April the 2nd through the 4th. We're going to be in Kingston, Georgia, outside of Rome, Georgia. We have a storm sawing workshop that'll be kicking off as a 3-day program. And it's a small group, about 12 usually in that class and a workshop. And we've got, I think, 4 signed up already. But if you're interested in that, you can find out more information at info@forestapps.com. And there's outlines and all on that. Maybe David will want to talk a little bit about that. He's going to be helping me on that one. And also we have our legacy program. I've got 6 signed up for that. And so that's going to be deadline on that registration is January the 10th. We'll be starting up our first session on January the 23rd on that one. And so that's the legacy program is for not new people to chainsaws, but people who have been running chainsaws that are interested in passing along to their employees or to different groups such as disaster groups, volunteer groups, those kinds of things. A lot of municipality, corporate type work. So all of that is, we got through 12 weeks of about hour-and-a-half sessions on Tuesday nights online, and then we'll be meeting for some hands-on training also after that. But that's a session that we had for 2023 kicked off. It did very well, and we had about 8 involved last year, and this year planning on about 12 or so in the class. So looking forward to that. There he is, from Sirens Project. See if I have some volume here. Hey, Warren. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Warren, Warren Causey. I live in Woodstock, Georgia, and I started, along with my wife, started the nonprofit Sirens Project in 2020. My roots are in mechanical engineering and a little bit of storm chasing. I've been chasing tornadoes since 2011 and fell in love with tree work.
So, Warren, what you had sent me a message talking about your lift that you were working on. Explain to us what you were talking about there. Has to do with wedging. What he's got, for years we've talked about segments on the tree. He's got a calculation. Being an engineer, he's got some backbone put to it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so basically, it kind of has the same, I guess, mathematical process as the segments. We achieve the same goal, anyways, but it's kind of an adaptation of the formula that I saw in "To Fell a Tree" by Jeff Jepson, and I think you guys are friends. At least I saw your name in the acknowledgments
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that book. Really interesting read. And so basically, being an engineer, I have some computer aided design software called SolidWorks that I do all my 3D modeling and stuff with. And I'm trying to adapt how to use CAD software into tree work. How can we solve rigging problems and different types of scenarios that we find in the field using this software, and to kind of put an engineering mindset to those types of situations. And I just wanted to kind of go back to the basics on calculating, the hinge length, as well as the what I call the fulcrum distance, which is the front of the hinge to the back of the tree, where you would insert the wedge. And it all comes kind of back to geometry and using um, a circle chord formula, basically a two lines or 2 points on a circle that are intersected by a line somewhere along the radius. And yes, it was really interesting to kind of go back through and using the 80% rule, kind of calculate how much displacement or crown movement you can get based on tree height, tree diameter, and wedge height. And what I found, and I'm sure this is this is kind of par for the course here. A lot of the guys over the years using the 80% rule for a good reason. And I calculated using different measurements, as far as 80% of the diameter being the hinge length versus 82% or 90% or 75%. And every time you use the 80% rule, the hinge length equals the fulcrum distance. And so knowing the fulcrum distance allows you to calculate the face notch depth, and kind of set your cuts up in your mind before even making a cut on the tree, and kind of verify the process is going to work before even making your first cut. And so it was really just a proof of concept to kind of back up the 80% rule. And also I was curious, could you kind of section out your cuts on the tree before even firing up the saw? And I think you can make a pretty good case that you can figure that out just using math ahead of time. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, we've kind of had a rule of thumb that we've used in our. We started off. Soren Erickson always utilized segments, we called it,
Mm.
and that would be your basic segment would be from the front of the hinge to wherever you place the wedge. So if you had a 1 foot tree, then basically 12 inches from that front of the hinge to the actual placement of the wedge, that would be a one segment tree. If you had 80-foot tall tree, you've got 80 segments. So theoretically, 1 inch lift in the rear would give you 80 inches in the top.
Yeah.
Everybody always talks about, well, you've got a fudge factor there, you've got compression factors and all that, and that was, what I wanted to ask you about is how you were kind of calculating that. It's not, to me, in reality, it's not that important, because unless you just got a real punky tree, in a wet area or something like that, that compression makes very, very little difference. But if you do try to be accurate with it, you also have the position of the center of the crown, and being able to take that and be accurate with that. But it was amazing the formulas that you had there, and a lot of people work that way. You're able to take and put in a couple calculations. And what I see to be the biggest issue is going back to the planning process. In other words, you've got to be able to calculate your leans correctly to be able to do that. Side lean plays an effect on it some, because of the pressure on the hinges. But the biggest thing is you've got to bring the center weight of that canopy, wherever it's positioned in the tree, past or forward of that hinge material, for it to be able to fall under its own weight. And so it is, like you say, it's very easy to calculate how much lift you need to get it to that point somewhat. But then you've got other factors. You've got wind, and you've got softer fibers, and this kind of thing. But it's so cool to be able to look at it and then look at what you were talking about with your calculations. It's the same thing we do, except we use kind of just a rule of thumb of it, and you were very accurate with it. I checked out a couple, using that. You're very accurate with it, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and math and physics, engineering, mechanics, all of that have a lot in common as far as there are some exceptions to the rule. Math usually is a perfect scenario. A lot of times we talk about a frictionless environment, or we take friction out of the equation, or we make certain assumptions about things. And like you said, there are a lot of factors that go into real world scenarios.
Hmm.
A lot of things that the math, you can't solve on paper. A lot of stuff would have to we'd have to use finite element analysis or some kind of computational rendering of what the real world situation is like, which is not practical in the field just because of the time consumption and computing power. But I think you're spot on with you can get a very good idea using the math, and I thought it was really satisfying that the 80% rule, that 80%, that the magic of that number is the hinge length equals the fulcrum distance every single time. And
Hmm.
I thought that was really unique about that specific number. And kind of, I haven't seen any literature on, maybe that is the reason why the 80% rule is kind of the rule of thumb. It's easy to calculate as long as you know the diameter. You can calculate the hinge length and immediately know what the fulcrum distance is without having to run any other type of calculation. So I don't know if that's coincidence, and I'm sure you know more. Maybe that's the whole point behind it.
Well, there's some consistency to it being a perfectly round tree, but ultimately
Yeah.
round. But the concept there is that 80% gives you a length of hinge to support the side weight. That's really what we look at there is the width of the hinge, the thickness of it keeps it attached during the fall. That's 10% of the diameter. Usually we use DBH, diameter breast height, just to have straight fiber that you're dealing with. So if you had a 20-inch stump on a cypress tree or something, it was 8 inches at the top. And if you try to put, a 2-inch hinge on it, it's not even going to fall. It's too thick. You're going to get splitting. So the 10% is a maximum, but the 80% is a minimum. So you seek, I explain it sometimes. If you went to the hardware store to get a hinge for a 20-inch tree, you would get one that's 2 inches thick and 16 inches long. And so
Mhm.
you take that hinge then and you would cut a face notch to the point to where you've got that 16 inches. And that we consider to be a minimum though, because as long as you got no side lean, it's not that big a deal. But if you've got 4 feet or 5 feet of side lean, then the length of the hinge makes a big difference in being able to control that side weight from breaking off. And the farther you go in, with your hinge on that particular tree, the quicker your wedge will lift, but the more pressure it takes to lift it. So, people talk about the farther in makes it easier to pull with a rope and stuff, and it does because of the mechanical advantage you're pulling high in the tree.
Mhm.
When you're lifting from a wedge, you don't have that much mechanical advantage, but you do have the ability to lift that weight point past the fulcrum. So the only thing you got to watch out for too is the farther you go in with that hinge, the more apt it is to break off and go backwards. Because the farther you are forward, the more support you have against back lean. And so, if it sits down 3/8 of an inch, you might lose 2 feet in the top, but as long as that hinge holds, it's not going backwards with it.
Yeah.
But I've got I don't know if you watched the video that I did. Yeah, I've had it for quite a while, but I wanted to play this, and I want you to kind of help discuss this a little bit about this. Just real short. It's about the taper of the hinge, and Let's see, I'm gonna put this up. Yeah, let's see, this is it. You see, most people try to stack the wedges on top of each other. Did you see that?
I did.
All right. So the first thing there is as most everybody did, and we did too. And there's rifled wedges, there's uh, different wedges with cleats. You've got smooth wedges, you've got kind of wood grain type wedges. All of that is to hopefully keep it from slipping out. All the years and years ago, even back into the crosscut days, you had guys who would take and say, well, they put sawdust in between the two wedges to keep them from kicking out. A lot of people would get a splitting wedge trying to jack a tree over, and it just didn't work too well, because they had hit it and it didn't go anywhere. And a lot of that was because of the taper of the wedge. And so when you stack two on top of each other too, unless you've got something in between there, when you hit one, the other tries to back out. And then especially if you don't have much weight on the tree, it pops out very, very quickly. So if we look though, when you start to think about crossing the wedges sideways, you have a flat lifting surface and you have also less resistance against the two that tends to take and make it easier to drive them in. You can't do it on a real small tree, but you get about 14 inches and bigger, it makes it possible to be able to do that. And so it works pretty good. So how would you calculate for that taper of the wedge and its liftability?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny you mentioned that because I was doing that today a little bit. Um, and so, basically when we look at the mechanical advantage of a wedge, we're looking at the length over the height. And typically a wedge being 1 inch tall. Well, let's take a 12-inch long felling wedge that's an inch high. We have a mechanical advantage of 12 to 1, and that is the mechanical advantage of the output force versus the input force. So whatever input force we put in by striking it with a hammer, that will be multiplied by 12 in an ideal situation. Now there's a lot of friction comes into play, and there's some loss of efficiency outside of ideal mechanical advantage. And first, I had to look at, okay, what what kind of forces are the wedges experiencing when you strike it with a hammer, and that becomes kind of an impulse question, an impulse problem. So we're looking at the momentum, the initial momentum versus the final momentum of the hammer strike, and I kind of looked at the steel splitting ball, for example, that has a 6.6 pound head to it, and if you were to swing that at around 35 miles an hour, just to put it in perspective, a Major League Baseball player can swing a bat, 80 to 85 miles an hour, and so that's really, that's really getting it with that bat. And so if we're kind of more on the conservative side of around 35 miles an hour. And we assume, and this is a pretty typical impulse uh, coefficient here, is you have to look at how long, what's the instance of time that the force is being delivered to the wedge. So you're kind of calculating deceleration. It's not the technical term you would use. It's acceleration, but it's acceleration in the opposite direction, basically. So you're coming to a stop. And so how long does it take for the hammer to come to a stop, or the axe or the splitting maul to come to a stop? And we kind of use 1 millisecond, or 0.008 seconds as kind of like a standard, kind of a standard coefficient. And so if you plug in the fact that the bat, or the axe is being swung at 35 miles an hour, it weighs 6.5 pounds, let's say, and the delivery of force is at just under 1 millisecond. That the end of that wedge, the strike face of that wedge, is experiencing right at 1,300 pounds. And so that's the initial effort that is being exerted onto the wedge. And so, you multiply that by 12, and, in theory, you're over 12,000 pounds of force being exerted into the tree, to be able to lift it. And then at that point, once you kind of have an idea of how much force you're applying, it really becomes a kind of a lever problem at that point. So you have a lever that is at one end, has a hinge that can act as a fulcrum, and that would be the kerf of the saw. Your wedge is being inserted into the kerf of the saw, and so you're acting upon that lever to lift the tree. And there's a pretty simple calculation for that. You can calculate the force required to lift a tree of a certain weight. If you're looking at your log tables, I know, was it Bartlett? I think tree. Those guys have like a pretty good like little log table on how much certain species weigh, volumetrically. And so really all you have to know is the center point of that weight, which we just assume is center of the fulcrum distance. And so you have to know that, and then you also have to know the distance from the fulcrum to where the lift is being applied by the wedge, which we assume, when you drive a wedge in flush with the back of the tree, that you're lifting that lever from the very end of the very end of that distance. And so I had a little example here. I kind of wrote this problem. What is the maximum force required to lift an 80-foot tall white oak tree with a 28-inch DBH, about the hinge, using the 80% rule? And so you look at, you have to know what the fulcrum distance is, which is calculated by the 80% rule right off the bat. And then you have to know the weight of the tree, and the distance at which you will be acting upon that lever, which is the diameter of the tree. And so taking that into account, we'll say the white oak tree, that's about 80 feet tall. This is, you have to take into account canopy, and moisture content. There's a lot of things that go into it. But using those log tables, we'll say the white oak weighs 21,200 pounds at 28-inch DBH, 80 feet tall. And so with the 80% rule, the fulcrum distance is 22.4 inches. So, using the formulas in my blog, the hinge length will equal the fulcrum distance using the 80% rule. And so when you work out this formula, which is force required to lift the tree, that's the function of the weight of the tree, the length of the lever, the distance at which the tree is being lifted within that lever, which is the diameter. And then also you have to multiply that by 2. So you get a force required to lift the tree about the hinge at 10,600 pounds. So you need, roughly 10,600 pounds of lifting force to get the tree to move about its fulcrum. And so, back to driving the, that wedge in, if you're applying, 1,300 pounds of force initially into the wedge, has a mechanical advantage of 12, then you're essentially applying 15,800 pounds of lifting force to the tree. So you're over that minimum lifting force requirement by about 5,000 pounds or 5,800 pounds, really.
So what you're saying is a wedge will work.
It'll work. And the
You
math
know,
says it will, yeah.
I always use the story that the Egyptians actually, I was reading this thing, the Egyptians actually put the pyramids in place with wooden wedges and rollers because they found them in the crypts, and I was telling that story up in Philadelphia area, and this guy said, I was just reading an article about that too. And I said, well, did they talk about that? And he said, no, they said aliens did it. And so, I found out real quick that I guess it's possible. I don't know, but it's something to where they would take those wooden wedges and jack the rocks up a little bit, put a roller under it, a log under it that's nice and smooth, and then they had 6,000 people that pushed it up a ramp to put it in the right spot. So, if you got a big enough hammer, you can do it.
Yeah, I mean that's true. Yeah, and sorry for the long-winded example there, but yeah, that's
On our my cross site, I have a quick calculation that just takes the height of the tree into the base, and it gives you the amount of lift. It's just a rule of thumb, but it's amazing how it works,
it is.
but when if you've got something that's pretty critical, it's nice to be able to put a little more detail to it. And that's what I liked about your presentation. Now, if you look, Robert Aubrey, and I don't know if you've ever met him or not. Most people know him as a claw man now, but he used to be
Yeah, Jambo. Yeah,
Jambo.
Jambo.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Jambo man. But now he's the claw. But anyway, Robert, he handles that pretty good. He's got all kinds of wedges, but he's got a big bobcat too.
If you can't wedge it, I guess you pull it.
Yeah, Robert is he's got a nice business around metropolitan Atlanta, and he's been working with trees since I guess this is 30 years, 31 years coming up.
Wow.
Well, February will be 34 years.
34. Oh, you keep adding years to it. You keep mine hasn't changed. We started the same time. Did
Just
we?
about. Just
Well,
about.
all right. But yeah, he figured out a long time ago after a big storm hit that it took some equipment, so he went and got that and started doing tree work. But I didn't even know who he was, but we one of our Arbor Game sessions, he showed up at, and I didn't know where he's from or anything. I was keeping up with all the addresses and contacts and all that kinds of stuff, but I didn't recognize he was close to home. And we were Christmas shopping that year and found him at Walmart. So and been best friend ever since. But anyway, and then we got Chris Chiles. Chris is gosh, it's been probably 6 or 8 years ago at least. He started one of my storm sawing workshops, I think, and we've been good friends since. And he's helping out some with training, and he heads up the chainsaw section of God's Pit Crew. So he's out and about all over the place.
Yeah, I just ran into him in Clarksville
Yeah.
about right before Christmas. It was good to see him.
Yeah, if you hang around many places very long, you'll run into him, that's for sure. He puts on a lot of miles. But he did a video the other day on the use of bore cut, and I was going to ask you too, Warren, how if you've ever used that, and Chris has become kind of a user when it comes to it. When you start thinking about back leans and wedges, that gives you the ability to get the tree get the wedges in a lot smaller tree, and then also with larger trees being able to take half and half or three-way cuts through the face notch and place your wedges so you don't lose any kind of back pressure, or not back pressure, but back movement of the tree.
Mm,
Because when you lose a little bit in the top, it takes more to lift it, right?
it
That changes
does.
that fulcrum length there. So, but Chris has had to use it in a lot of different things. But he's got some big equipment too, though. He kind of cheats, but he likes that kinds of stuff. But explain to us a little bit, Chris, about what you were doing with the bore cut and leaners. I played the video for him last week, and you got tied up in the meeting.
I
But
think he's muted still.
muted? I think you are muted. Can you unmute?
Yeah,
There
I
it is.
can.
There you are.
I'm right here.
So I guess you heard me anyway, though. I just couldn't hear you.
Yeah, yeah, I heard you. You want me to talk about the bore cut?
Yeah, I showed the video last week, and you got tied up. I wanted you to kind of explain what you went through there.
Yeah, I mean, on a forward leaner, which we run into all the time, especially in disasters. I see so many people barber chair. I see, and I mean, at that point, you don't know where the tree is going to go. So I really love the open face notch and the bore cut in a heavy forward leaning situation. And then, as Warren knows, being on the field there in disasters, you got people running around like crazy. And when you're just doing a standard cut, your adrenaline's pumping. You're trying to figure out when the tree is going to go, all of that stuff. But when you have control and you've got that back strap or your trigger, you can slow down, make sure everybody's clear, and zip that thing off, and you don't have any issues. No barber chairing. It works really well.
And so you got kind of a timed release there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. A timed release. Volunteers are volunteers. At the end of the day, you're working with people that aren't professional in the tree industry. You've also, especially in a metropolitan area like that, there's just random people there that are trying to help their neighbors, and everybody's walking around. You have so much control when you've got that back strap. I got spotters looking, coast is clear. It works really well.
Hmm. And you use it on back leaners too, I assume?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Did one today here in town. It was a big white oak, had about 6 foot of back lean, massive tree. Same situation. Open face notch, bore cut, drive my wedges in, and I had to drive them a fair amount to get that tree to come over, but I had full control.
Hmm. Hmm. But that was one other thing too. That's neat with Warren's calculations is if you kind of get a picture of that in your head of how that works, you think about if you've got that tree and you've got your wedge farthest to the back, you've got maximum lifting power, right?
Right.
Closer, it takes more power to lift. It'll move faster, but it takes more power to lift. The farther you are back, the more power you have to lift. So as you start to lift the tree, if you think about those calculations, let's say we're 16 inches back. Once we start to get the tree to lift, we can move a wedge closer to the fulcrum.
Mm-hmm.
And so now all of a sudden you go from 16-inch segment to 8-inch segment, you know. And so you start thinking about then you can jack some pretty good trees as long as you got
Oh yeah,
enough space and be able to work them around. And I think
yeah.
you can drive 3 wedges in and be able to get a nice smooth lift going. And you don't have to beat so hard on the wedges either. So that's another thing looking at how that pressure comes onto the wedge. If you put 3 in there, it's actually separated. So you load one and then you load the next one. That one becomes looser. And then looser, is that a word? And then you go to the other one and so you're able to lift in succession. So you start thinking about how you can be able to get that lift going, and it helps to be able to use that trigger or release in the back to be able to hold whether it's forward or back. It gives you the ability to get your wedge in tight and so you don't lose any back movement whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And he said conservatively we may swing 35 with more weight. And so that'd be a larger hammer.
Hmm. That's correct.
And so if I only swing 40, or what if the minimum force required to lift that tree? I guess it's what is the minimum force required to lift that tree?
Yeah, there's um with I'll probably write another post going into a little bit more detail on this. It kind of goes back to the the tree being a lever, like you're dealing with a lever. You can calculate beforehand based on the diameter and the fulcrum distance and the weight of the tree. What is the minimum force required to lift that tree, to begin to lift that tree over center? And once you have that minimum force required, you can then begin to look at your availability of strength to put an effort into the wedge, and also choosing your wedge based on its mechanical advantage. If you have the room for a longer wedge, obviously it has more mechanical advantage than a shorter one as far as length goes. And so that's when you can start kind of picking your plan apart. You're like, okay, I know I need 10,000 pounds of lifting force. Swinging, I think my example here was swinging at 35 miles an hour with a heavier hammer actually achieves more input force than swinging the daylights out of a hammer with a light head. And so that's a good balance there, is choosing maybe a slightly heavier hammer or driving tool versus swinging harder. So
I found that over the years. We kind of zeroed in on about a 5 pound wedge axe, and that made a big difference. I kind of got away from the axe because of sometimes occasional users in the classes, it gets a little scary sometimes. So I went to a 6 pound, you know, type of a sledgehammer,
mm,
and it definitely, the pound difference makes a big difference. And I was noticing they had one up to 26 pounds. I thought about that, but then I couldn't swing that, I don't think. So, but the 6 pound over the 5 makes a difference. But I see a lot of people trying to wedge the trees over, got a 3.5 pound or a junior axe. One thing you got to watch out with is short handles, makes you bend over closer to the wedge. If it does pop out, you can eat one very quickly.
mhm.
So the longer handle helps there too. But a lot of people don't like to carry a long handle through the woods or up around the trees. But something in about a 20 to 36-inch handle makes a big difference in a 5, 6 pound head. So it does. And he had asked about what is the 80% rule, and that's one thing I don't think on Instagram it doesn't keep the recording unless they record it themselves. And he said, "What is the 80% rule?" He missed that part. So you're saying that your calculation came out to the 80. We always used it by 80% of the diameter and length of the hinge, and that moves the depth into the tree according to the shape of the tree. But you're saying that the actual calculations of lift all come back to that 80% rule, right?
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier to calculate how much lift you need, because you have to know, in order to know how much lift or how much available lift you have, you have to know what the fulcrum distance is. And again, the fulcrum distance is the front of the hinge to the back of the tree. And using the 80% rule, if we're assuming the tree is decently round, it becomes very easy to calculate the fulcrum distance. The fulcrum distance is the length of the hinge using the 80% rule. So they're one and the same. And that kind of takes a lot of the guesswork out. If you don't use the 80% rule in order to calculate the fulcrum distance before you even make a cut, you have to go back to some of the geometry formulas on calculating the chord of a circle. Finding where that line on the circle lies in relation to the radius, and so you have to break out some sines and cosines and all that good stuff. But as long as you adhere to the 80% rule, you already know what the fulcrum distance is because it equals the hinge length.
Mhm. Chris, what do you use kind of as a factor? What do you look at? If you go up like that tree today and you see the diameter and the height and the weight of it, what would make you say I'm going to go get the machine?
Oh man, as far as in my opinion, if it's back lean, I can overcome back lean. I'm comfortable overcoming back lean. That tree was probably 30 inches in diameter, so I had a 3 inch hinge on a 30-inch diameter tree with 5, 6 foot of back lean. I was completely comfortable. If it would have had say 8 foot of side lean going towards someone's house, then that's a different ball game in my opinion. That's when I either climb it or I bring a machine in to get rid of the weight from that side. But if it's tall, then I've got I've got a good place to put my wedges. You can overcome a ton of back lean.
Mm-hmm. And one thing a lot of people don't realize is the too thick of a hinge. A lot of times people want to leave too thick of a hinge, and that creates resistance with your wedging or pulling. It creates splitting and splitting and pulled fiber. So a lot of times I see people try to leave too much hinge, and the wedge doesn't work then.
Yeah, I think
and even
that
it doesn't work.
that 10% rule is key. I always go back to that, the 10%. I want my hinge to be 10%. I hear people say, well, I leave it a little bit thicker in this situation. I leave it a little bit thinner in that situation. Man, I stick to the 10%. It works.
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty easy to calculate too. When you start going down, you're taking a guess. When you're
Yep.
going up, you're taking a guess.
Yeah, I don't like guessing.
Yeah. There is some technical study that went with that. The Swedish Forest Institute back years ago, Soren was always talking about this, where they took different fibers, which most of them were, Scandinavian, softer fibers and very slow growth hardwoods. And when you start to look at how fiber works, and some of the mead paper specialists explain this to us too, is that the fiber goes to about a 70-degree position, and that's where it's going to start to break. So as it starts from the thickness of the hinge and goes over, it starts pulling and breaking from the back. If it's too thick, it's going to start to separate. So you get barber chair. Okay. But if you think about how the fiber starts to break, it'll completely break off between 70 and 90. And so that's it. If it's proper width. And so that's where that 10% kind of came into. And then the same thing kind of they came about with the length of it being that 80% is that you could go into 100, but then you increase the chances of it going backwards as well as going forward. You could go into the 100 in a case where you needed more support for side weight. And so on a forward leaning tree, that's great. It gives you more side protection, as far as the side lean, the longer the hinge, like a door hinge, piano hinge all the way down the door, it will hold a bigger door, a heavier door than two small hinges, or one small hinge in the middle. So you start thinking about that hinge length supports the side weight. And so they came about with that 80% as far as that goes, to be able to maintain the side weight of the tree. And one other thing that I always try to point out too is a lot of people they have trouble wedging and hinging with back cuts. You want to try to keep things as level to the apex of the face notch as possible. If you use less than a 70-degree opening, that's when you're going to end up at halfway to the earth. Your hinge is going to break off. But with the open face, you mentioned about the open face, that's written up as 70 degrees or more. It can go 100 degrees, 110 degrees. You can do that with a Humboldt. You can do it with a wider common notch, as people call it, but we call it the open face. And so basically 70 degrees or more, that enables that tree to move all the way till that fiber break point before the hinge is stressed. If you stress the hinge before that and it breaks and you're not to that 70-degree position, it also increases the chances of butt rebound. And so that's something that you have to watch out for in any time you're cutting trees or limbs, is that it can come back towards the operator. So you want to think about that hinge thickness stays attached during that falling process. And so forward leaning tree, not a big deal as long as there. If you start to get side lean, it starts to affect it. And if you have back lean with too thin of a hinge, what's going to happen? If you're back here at say 25 degrees back, and you've got a 45-degree notch, how far is it going to be at straight up and down?
You're almost
Right?
there.
If you go over just a little bit farther, maybe 30 degrees, and now you've got your hinge is going to break because your face notch is going to close. And also, people don't think about the Dutchman or bypass, we call it, in the face notch. It creates stress on the hinge. So in a wedging situation, that creates a lot of I guess you'd say miscalculations, because it's going to pop off. It's going to go where it wants to go. If you can get it falling into the face notch, it's going to pretty much go there. But if you've got side weight or you've got twist or something, the limb touches in the crown, now you've got a situation you're going to lose control somewhat, whether it's just a fence line or whether it's a house. And so you gotta make sure that hinge, whether it's on a tree or a limb, you should have a specific uh, plan to be able to have that limb or tree go to where you want it to go. And once you use those calculations of the lift and you use the calculations of the leans, and you can be very accurate with it time after time after time. Then all you have to do is really concentrate on the hazards. Most people concentrate on the hazards before they have the plan, and then it creates a real havoc. But if you have the plan down, then you can concentrate on the hazards and be able to keep yourself safe, and usually be able to get the results that you're after.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have been trying to work a little bit in my spare time, which is not very much. Trying to put together a little rigging and felling cheat sheet. And Chris, you might take a liking to this idea of having a kind of, when you look at a situation like a tree on a house or something like that, being able to quickly analyze the situation and use a couple of formulas to assess how much lift or force is required on the rope to lift a tree from a certain estimated angle, based on the weight and all that stuff. Is it still attached to the root ball? Is it not attached to the root ball? Are you planning on lifting it completely in its weight entirety, or leaving one end of it on the ground? Because in that case, you really only have to apply half of the weight of the equivalent of the weight of the tree in a pulling force to be able to lift it. And the closer you get to 90, the less weight you have to, or the less force you actually have to manipulate the tree. And just little stuff like that, deflection angles for pulleys, to making sure, your anchor points and stuff are okay as far as them exhibiting a certain amount of force during a rigging operation, stuff like that. Just a little something to be able to kind of go through and be like, okay, yeah, this checks out. We should be okay, kind of thing.
Well, there has to be in any type of equipment, you've got to have some testing, and that goes usually with the designee. But then when you start applying that piece of equipment, whether it's a pulley or a rope or whatever, to the actual task, that's where the operator has to understand what the limitations are. And so that's where it adds up for maintaining the safety and being productive with the tool. That's like chainsaws. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to cut stuff, and there's a lot of different size saws, but picking the right one for the right task and making sure it's maintained properly, and it all goes together to be productive and safe with it. So pretty cool. I don't see. He's got to come on to Zoom.
Yeah, I don't see the live stream on YouTube, but it could be on my end. I was just checking to see if.
I think it dropped.
Gotta love technology sometimes.
Well, I'm getting better at it, but
Yeah. I've been enjoying these Thursday night, you know, saw talks and stuff. It's been good. I like to kind of wind down my week with joining you guys and just listening to what everybody has to say because I'm still learning a lot, you know, and I love the industry and it's great to be surrounded by people who have the same kind of passion, you know, for safety and as well as efficiently and you know just doing smart things. Yeah.
yeah, I'm hoping that we can get a panel going every Thursday night and have some different topics and things and um, so that's my hopes at it and cover a lot of different topics of tree care and disaster cleanup. And so that's where it's going. I've got coming up. I mentioned a little bit earlier the storm sawing workshop, which we're going to have in Kingston, Georgia, April the 2nd through the 4th. And that's a 3-day program that covers felling, limbing, bucking, looking at some storm hazard things, and also we'll be putting that on. And I've got it's classes about a third full right now. And then I've got the legacy workshops. And so, Warren, I think you're going to be part of that. Chris was in last year.
All
And so that the deadline for the registration is on the 10th of January, and then we'll be starting on the 23rd and getting that going with another group. And I think I've got about 6 already signed up for that. And that's going through a little bit, kind of like discussion we had tonight, looking at the particulars of how do we take and measure stuff and get it across to people. And whether we have a 2-page formula that we work with, or whether we have a rule of thumb that from our experience we gained, and if you tie both of those together, now you've got something that works. You know what I mean? That's really where it works, and that's where sharing people's experience can make a big difference. And so that's what legacy is all about. And we look at what should go into a program for chainsaw operation. And we don't get into we do a little bit of wedging maybe, but as far as other riggings and things like that, we don't. This is strictly chainsaw safety and productivity and trying to get operators out there, especially volunteers and employees, new employees, city, county, municipality workers up to a certain level. And what do we do that? How do we do that? What knowledge do we need to, as a supervisor or an instructor, pass along to be able to maximize our effects? And that's what legacy is all about. And so that's the key there. Also, I've got started up in the studio here. I'm going to be putting together. I've got one starting on January the 16th, and that's going to be a 2-hour chainsaw workshop, more or less going over planning processes, PPE, uh, uh, looking at some maintenance on the saw, sharpening, those kinds of things that I'll be doing here in the studio. And that's just my more or less what has been my day one um, presentation indoors in a classroom format that I've done live for years. I'm going to be doing that in the studio format over Zoom. And so I've got that set up, and that's for new operators as well as experienced, but more or less cover new operators. And it's going to be on that Tuesday night from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. So a 2-hour Zoom session. And I think it can be an asset to a lot of folks. And so that's available, and that's a $25 for that. Those I'm gonna try to get as many people on there as I can. It's kind of an introductory thing. It'll probably be going up after we get going with them. But the first one's $25 per seat. And if you've got a larger group, church or disaster group or employees, if you'll let me know at info@forstaffs.com, we'll try to work out something where you can be able to either separate it where they can watch it on a handheld device, or they can watch it on a larger screen TV or as a group, or however they want to do it. So that's something to do. That'll be a live presentation on the on that Tuesday night. So that's out there. And I've got some videos that are on that on the YouTube channel if you want to see a little bit more about it.
Can we pay for that on your website, Tim? I've got some ministries I think might be interested in getting their guys involved in that.
Yeah, you can go on our Spotify account, which is listed off the website. It's
Yep.
our e-store.
Yep.
Also on the introduction video, I've got a QR code on there that will lead to it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll share that with some of the guys. I think they'd really enjoy that and get some good stuff out of it.
Yeah, you can pay for that, and also the other two workshops, the storm song workshop and the legacy on there. But those two are a little bit more expensive, but good sessions. Appreciate y'all dropping by tonight, and be doing another one I think next Thursday night. We had several on here watching on Instagram. That's become I guess that's my largest numbers. If you haven't subscribed, please do so on YouTube and Facebook, and follow on Instagram. And we're trying to grow the channels and get as many people out there watching and everything. We get this panel system going. I think there's a lot of others out there with a lot of experience that can help us to be able to share a lot about chainsaw safety and productivity, trying to keep as many out there safe as possible. And it's more and more growth in the industry as a tree care and arboriculture and urban logging and everything. So it's quite a lot of chainsaw operations still going on. And so we want to try to keep everyone as safe as possible, keep it going. But I want to thank all y'all for dropping by. We'll do it again next Thursday night. And Warren, keep up all the good work there. And we hope to see you next Thursday night, maybe too. And Chris,
Yes, sir.
You're gonna be busy, but next.
Hey, I'll be here if you want me to be here. Yes, sir. I'll be here.
All right. Well, we'll try to get you guys going and add some more too. But I appreciate y'all, and we will see you next Thursday. And wish everyone out there good sawing. Talk to you later.